bring John McMullen in on this. John, tell me what you know. And look, do I think it was the number one factor in why the Eagles lost Super Bowl 57? Absolutely not. But I don't know, just like anybody, it's human nature. When you have a great job that's waiting for you, there's not a chance in hell you're 100% focused on the task at hand. You're just not. And the way that this has been handled, the owner of the Eagles, the owner of the Cardinals, and the commissioner were the only three people involved in this. Can you add anything more to this?
Yeah, I don't believe that for a second, Dan. I mean, well, a number of things. One, I wish, this kind of stuff happens all the time. Now, what happened is the Cardinals have, for instance, you're saying, how can you not be distracted? Was Shane Steichen distracted? Nobody cares about Shane, right? I mean, Shane was leaving. Shane had the job in Indy. Shane interviewed after the NFC Championship game. But here's the difference. There's a, arcane rule in the NFL. There are certain windows you can interview potential head coaches for during the playoffs. After the NFC Championship game, the bye week, you can interview coaches in the Super Bowl, but only as a second interview. Only as a second interview. So Shane had already interviewed with Indianapolis. So Indianapolis was permitted to interview him again. Ultimately, he got the job. We all knew he had the job in going into the Super Bowl. Shane was fine. The year prior, Kevin O'Connell was fine. Kevin O'Connell had the Minnesota job. He was fine. This stuff happens all the time in the NFL, Dan. All the time.
But you don't get fined for tampering all the time. And I would say this to you, John. I agree. It happens all the time. Shane Steichen was not a play caller. Shane Steichen was a designer of an offense, of an RPO. When you have different responsibilities in your offense, because Jalen Hurts' decision-making, he's the play caller in game. They don't go like this, John. Hey, let's run a 37-8 route with a tail on it, with a turn in. There's a different responsibility from a coordinator that runs an RPO to a guy who's preparing against Andy Reid, in my opinion.
Shane Steichen's one of the best play callers in the NFL.
How could an RPO be a play call when it's decision making in the moment and at the play? When you say hut, Jalen's got to make that decision. Whether to keep it, run it, throw it.
On an RPO or a zone read, the entire offense is not RPO zone read based. They have many play calls. Boy, you are really diminishing.
Boy, I disagree with you 100% on this one.
Shane Steichen was one of the best 5 play callers in the NFL last season. He was the Eagles play caller. And I'll say this, Dan, look at the Eagles offense with Nick Sirianni. Look at the Eagles offense with Shane Steichen. Shane was a better play caller than Nick Sirianni. They put the game in the hands
of Jalen Hurts.
Shane Steichen is one of the best play callers in this league. Ask anybody around the NFL. That's the reason he's a head coach in Indianapolis right now.
We will find that out.
However, the point I'm trying to make is this absurdity that coaches do not interview after the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl is ridiculous. The reason why Arizona was hit for tampering is because Monty Ossenfort got the job on January 16th. He's a rookie GM. He did not evidently know you can only interview a coach from a Super Bowl team after the NFC Championship game or the AFC Championship game if you interviewed them prior. He did not interview them prior. So basically, Arizona didn't understand the legislation. They contacted Jonathan Gannon before they should have, and they got hit for it. But to me, that's in the weeds. That's the tampering aspect. What the tampering aspect has done is fuel these conspiracy theorists. It's much simpler than that. It's basically Jonathan didn't handle it well from a political standpoint. There's a way you do things. He did not handle it well. He did not explain it well. He did not speak about it well. I knew Jonathan Gannon was going to be the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals on Saturday before the Super Bowl. Let me ask you this. And by the way, I wasn't the only reporter who knew that.
And for the record too, John, I knew that the Eagles Super Bowl week had offered Frank Reich the offensive coordinating job for the Eagles. You know why? He said it on my show.
Well,
and that was before he was announced in Indianapolis as the head coach in Indianapolis. He came on this show and I asked him explicitly, have the Eagles reached out to you to be the offensive coordinator of the team? He said yes.
Well, Nick talks to Frank all the time. They're very, very close.
It was Howie.
But Nick, Nick texts Frank every day, every week during the regular season. I talked about it numerous times with him. He does it all the time. They're very close.
They are.
Now Frank got the job in Carolina.
That's the only reason he didn't take the OC job. Because he was going to come to John. He said it on the program. We interviewed him.
It would have been interesting because the Eagles were concerned about losing Brian Johnson.
By the way, I love you, John McMullen.
Yeah. They were concerned about losing Brian Johnson. Now, if you're asking me, Nick's closer to Kevin Patullo than Brian Johnson. Nick's very close.
I thought they were going to bring him in as the OC. I thought they were going to maybe get him, but probably Jalen. Would you agree Jalen probably had a lot to do with Brian?
Well, that's a big part of it too. You want to make the quarterback happy, and the quarterback's very close to Brian Johnson. But getting back to JG, to use the Eagles as an example. Now, a lot of people are saying Jonathan didn't tell the truth, which he didn't. Either to Kevin O'Connell, as I brought up, either to Shane. You don't talk about it. You don't talk about it until afterwards. There's sort of an unwritten rule. So you play this tap dance game. So the Eagles did the same thing, right? Howie said, well, we told Jonathan after the game that how did I know he was getting the head coaching job before that? You're telling me the Eagles didn't know that? And you could ask Jody Mack, my partner. I texted him from Phoenix. I said, Gannon's getting the Arizona job.
John, what's the angle where the Eagles are being penalized though? Why?
What happened? Penalized? The Eagles weren't penalized at all.
Oh, okay, yeah. Because what did they do? They swap picks?
Yeah, the Eagles went from the bottom of the third round to the top of the third round.
Okay.
Here's the deal with the Eagles.
So they were compensated, you think? Then?
Yes. Oh, the Eagles were compensated because the Arizona and Monty Ossenfort self-reported. I don't even know if I believe that, but he claimed he self-reported. Here's the deal with the Eagles. They have two assistant GMs. One of their assistant GMs is named John Ferrari. What is John Ferrari's background? He's a football compliance guy. He's a football ops guy. He's the guy who knows the rules backwards and forwards. I guarantee you, John Ferrari said, you know what? They screwed up here. And by the way, Howie's pissed off dating back to last year because everybody keeps pilfering his team. Last year it was Brandon Brown and Ian Cunningham before the draft. This year he's getting destroyed with all his coaches. He's pissed off that everybody's taken away from the Eagles. So he's like, they didn't do it the right way. Let's get something for it. And they got something for it. Turned out to be Sidney Brown. And we'll see how that works out. But as far as Jonathan Gannon, look, here's what I say to all these people. Criticize him for the game. If you need the scapegoat, use him as the scapegoat.
And his professionalism, John.
I'll say this. It's one of the most competitive people I've ever met. If someone says to me, it's a lifetime football guy, he's been coaching since his 20s, he's going to be coaching for a long time, hasn't won a Super Bowl. if you think for 1 second that he didn't want to win that game at all costs
Didn't
get a
say that.
Super Bowl ring, a lot of people have. I'm not saying you. A lot of people have said this. That's the part I won't even entertain. If you want to talk about he did a bad job, he did this, he did that, that's fine. Get off that he didn't want to win the game. He was distracted. That part of it's bullshit. Excuse my French.
Let's go on to this. You know what? It's been now 2 years me talking about Howie Roseman, and I gotta walk this back. John, this fucking guy is unbelievable. He is unbelievable. Between the contract, getting Slay to take $3.5 million less, getting the corners back, drafting a better player or prospect than Javon Hargrave and Carter. I mean, then getting a guy in Nolan Smith who you can put in the wide side who runs a 4.3. I mean, really the only question mark is, and then you have the best offensive line coach. And Jimmy Johnson said, my number one coach on my staff was Tony Weiss, my O-line coach. When you have that in the building, you win. Really, the only issue maybe is right guard. Do you agree with me on this, John? That they're in a better place right now than they were coming out of the 17th Super Bowl when they won it. Coming out of a loss of a Super Bowl, they're in a better place right now moving forward than they were then.
Offensively, they certainly are. I mean, you know, if you go back to when Carson was hurt, they didn't have the playmakers like they have now with AJ and Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. They've done enough in the running game with DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny that you can sort of cobble it together, even, you know, behind that offensive line. I mean, which is the best in football, as you mentioned. Defensively, though, I got a problem with the back seven. They did nothing at all ball linebacker. Think about they lost over 2,000 snaps at all ball linebacker with TJ Edwards and Kaiser White. Kobe Dean's got a lot of potential, but he played 36 reps last year. That's it. And then they signed Nicholas Morrow. And by the way, I always say, not the contracts tell you everything, but he didn't get 1 cent of guaranteed money. That tells me a lot. Not 1 penny.
He's a dude.
So, they got to add there. And at safety, they lost Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They lost Marcus Epps. Again, major reps. You're talking about an undrafted rookie from last year, Reed Blankenship. You're talking about Terrell Edmonds, who you paid $2 million. And you're talking about a rookie in Sidney Brown. I got some concerns on the back end of the defense. And on top of it, their defensive line on paper looks ridiculous. But you know what, Dan? I guarantee you right here, mark down the date, they're not getting 70 sacks.
Oh, no.
That ain't happening again.
Especially with the better teams they're playing and the better schedule this year, too. Better coordinators.
Better regression to the mean. I mean, it's just it ain't happening again. Even if they had Vic Fangio, even if they, it ain't happening. That kind of stuff is magical.
But John, listen to this, and here is my dream front seven for the Eagles if it all pans out: Brandon Graham, Jalen Carter, Fletcher Cox with Davis in rotation. Josh Sweat is on the other end. Nolan Smith goes to a will linebacker. N'Kobe in the middle, and Hassan. And you have both these guys, Nolan Smith and Reddick, as weapons coming off the perimeter. And you have Josh Sweat and Graham setting the edges. To me, when I look at that front seven, and if, again, like you said, potential means you haven't done it yet. That's N'Kobe Dean. I completely get it. Davis has a lot. We're going to talk about him here in a minute. But Reddick, Dean, Smith, Sweat, Cox, Carter, Brandon Graham. That's a pretty good looking talented front seven. If you're asking me, that's the best front seven in the NFC East for sure.
Oh, I think it's the best front in the NFL.
Absolutely.
Potentially
Even
talent.
better than San Francisco's, John, I think.
Oh yeah, they're much deeper talent wise. But yeah, I mean, Nolan Smith. No, I'm not putting him at linebacker. He's an edge rusher.
Yeah, but
That to
that's
me
what
is
I'm
similar.
saying. You've got to rush him off the edges. And to me, you've got to play him like they play Reddick on the other side. You got
Yeah,
to you can have both these guys, John.
Vic calls them overhang players. That's whatever
Yeah.
you want to call them.
Yes.
They're edge rushers. Nolan is, Hassan is. Arizona got caught up back in the day. Oh, Hassan's so athletic, we're going to make him an all-ball linebacker. No, same thing with Micah Parsons in Dallas. Dallas got lucky. A bunch of guys got hurt because they were trying to make him an all-ball linebacker.
Dan Quinn didn't know what he had until he put him up.
Yeah. So, I don't want to mess with Nolan Smith. I'll tell you what Sean Desai might do a little bit differently, at least from watching Chicago film, is he, on known pass, he'll overload one side. So, he might put Reddick and Nolan Smith on the same side and try to create that stress that way. But you have, if you think about the edge guys, you have Reddick, you have Sweat, you have Brandon, and you have Nolan Smith. I mean, and then inside, you have Bletch, you have Jalen Carter now, you have Milton Williams, you have Jordan Davis, you have Marlon Tuipulotu, who's better than people think. You have Kentavious Street, who's, can play a little bit.
What's Milton Williams' role?
Well, unfortunately, he's not going to be able to play that much. I think Jalen Carter is the best player in the draft.
Yes.
I think he's got a chance to be a starter day one.
I compared him, John, to Jerome Brown, and I've not done that in my 27 years broadcasting, and I've never compared anybody to the player because of his feet, his hands, his so-called. Remember, he was a lazy guy at Miami, and Reggie made him a better practice player, and so did Seth. And so did Buddy. Once he got to Philadelphia, John, Jerome turned into a better worker than he was when he was at Miami. It's just human nature. You're killing everyone in college. When you get to the NFL, you got to be prepared because everyone's great. So I mean,
and that's the thing about
Carter.
Look, he's had the issues. We all know the issues. But I mean, he's not, Al Capone. He's immature. he's a 21. He's not out there robbing liquor stores and, being tax evade. He's not a criminal. He's made some mistakes. I've gotten to meet him. He seems like a good kid. Everybody says he's a good kid. By the way, Nolan Smith and Calais Ringo. I don't know what they're doing.
I was impressed with Nolan Smith at the press conference.
They are leaders. They are. So it's really impressive what Kirby Smart has been doing down there. But you brought up Howie. I'll just say that. I know Howie has done a great job. Don't get me wrong. But part of it is Jeffrey Lurie, in that Howie gets to do stuff like other people can't do. Like I'm sitting there going at 9 Chicago. Ryan Poles can't take Jalen Carter. He can't do it because he's got no gravitas. He tore that team down. If he makes one mistake, he's going to lose his job. You even go to Brad Holmes in Detroit as a third-year guy. He can't do certain things. These young guys,
I just built so much equity up, John.
Yeah,
with Jeffrey that it was on display in this draft.
So think about draft weekend. I brought up polls. Okay, Chicago should have took Jalen Carter, but
Seattle
Howie. Seattle, John Snyder's more entrenched, so that he can make decisions. But then we talked about Monty Ossenport making the mistake, the tampering penalty. It's a rookie GM. Brad Holmes in his third year. What do? You sign David Montgomery in free agency. You draft the kid at running back at number 12 overall. You're basically signaling we can't keep DeAndre Swift, and how he gets him for a song and a dance.
Unbelievable.
Young GMs, inexperienced, making mistakes, and he takes advantage of it.
I almost fell off my chair when I heard the DeAndre Swift move. And then when I heard what the compensation was, I was like this. He's not Christian McCaffrey, but he's kind of like him because that's the guy they want in the backfield. And John, I like that player. And I was impressed with him in that Detroit game last year. I mean,
that was his best game he ever played. So everybody.
But to me, I was just taken by how well he's done. Not just that, then the constructing of the contract with Jalen, they front-ended it instead of back-ending it. And you see what the cap hits are, and you're like, holy shit, traditionally 99% of the general managers put their team in financial ruin by signing these. The stroke of being able to do that, I mean, John, do you think this is his best offseason that he's had as general manager? Because there was a lot of work to do.
Last year was pretty good.
Yeah, but there was more work. See, last year, John, they were able to because Jalen didn't have that contract that's going to hit the team at 24. And you got veterans, and you had a lot of veteran dudes. But to me, this year, what they did was obviously not the same experience that they bring in. However, they're cheaper, and they're more athletic, and they're younger with some of the players that they're now bringing in.
Well, definitely. But, the projection part, you have to do that. You have to shift gears. Now, Jalen Carter's got to be a player. I think he's going to be a player. Nolan Smith, Sidney Brown. Last year, remember, Cam Jurgens didn't play. Nakobe Dean didn't play. They have to be players. So it's more projection this year. Javon Hargrave, you mentioned, really good player. We knew that. Isaac Seumalo, really good player.
Really good.
C.J. Gardner-Johnson, really good player. Marcus Epps was, solid player. I'm not going to go overboard. T.J. Edwards had a great year. Kaiser White, solid player. That's a lot of, as I was saying, reps you have to replace. And look, Jalen Carter's got more talent than Javon Hargrave. Jim Schwartz used to call it startup costs with young players. You have startup costs. They're going to have startup costs. As talented as they are, you got to get over that hump.
Absolutely. Two last questions for you. John, you've been around them, and I've only heard about them. Give me your sense of Sean Desai. What have you?
I haven't been around him. I haven't been around. The Eagles haven't introduced Sean Desai. It's funny. We were joking about that today.
Huh.
We got to talk to DeAndre Swift and Olamide Zaccheaus today. And I was joking with some of the Eagles PR people. I said, can you confirm Sean Desai's a real person? Because we haven't gotten, we're going to be able to talk to him soon, whether they're having rookie camp on Friday or OTAs, which start in late May. But, because the Eagles had such a long season because they were in the Super Bowl, they hired him late. Then they went into draft mode, so they kind of used that as an excuse. We haven't talked to him yet. Pretty
weird a little bit, huh?
Oh, very weird. Very weird.
Do you think they're still deciding, John, on what defense they're going to run? Because to me,
no.
Absolutely they don't have the linebackers to play at 34.
Absolutely not. I mean, well, nobody plays at 34. I mean, everybody's in nickel today.
Everyone's in nickel. 72% of the defensive snaps are nickel. Correct.
He's closer, he's a closer Vic Fangio guy than Gannon was. I mean, Sean was a first removed disciple. Sean
was he in Chicago?
Yes. Sean worked under Vic for years. No, they're running the same scheme. Nick has said that. We've talked to Nick a bunch. They're running the same defensive scheme. Now, I brought it up with Shane and Nick. They ran the same offensive scheme, but it's a little bit different. When you have a guy in the moment, he's going to be a little bit different. So he might do something different on 3rd and 13 than JG would have done. But the same basic philosophy, the Big Fangio defense, that's what they're running. That's what they're running. And that's why they probably would have hired Vic himself if Jonathan got the Houston job. But by the way, Adam Schefter got the calendar wrong. Vic took the Miami job on January 29th, which, if that's familiar for Eagles fans, that was the day of the NFC Championship game.
Yeah.
So, in other words, if the tampering didn't happen, if they just fired Jonathan Gannon, whatever you want to speculate, they couldn't have gotten Nick Sirianni. He already agreed to go to Miami, and Nick's not going to Josh McDaniels the Dolphins. He's not that guy. So that was already done. So that part of it had to do with the Houston job. If Jonathan would have gotten the Houston job, and a lot of people thought he was going to get that job, then Vic Fangio would have been in play for the Eagles.
Finally, John, Jordan Davis. How would you be feeling right now if the Eagles gave a 33-year-old D tackle $10 million and they just went back into the draft, second year in a row, and grabbed another D tackle? And my opinion is this. You tell me if I'm wrong. I think that I like the player. He's not a bust. I hate when people are saying that. I think he was overdrafted. I thought he was more down in the 20s. He's not going to be Fletcher Cox. That's not who he is. I thought he was going to be more Vince Wilfork. Somebody like that. Vince has 3 rings and a major part of winning Super Bowls in New England. So that's not a bad rip. I love Vince. However, I think they look at him like this. Hey, man, we really like you, but we'd like you to pick your game up a little more. Is that fair, John?
Yeah, I think the problem with Jordan is, one, he didn't play a lot at Georgia because Georgia's so talented. They would come at you in waves, and, he didn't play a lot of reps. So I think conditioning was a big part of it. And then he got hurt. He was actually coming on before he got hurt, if you remember. And then he missed about a month with a high ankle sprain. And then by that point, Marlon Tuipulotu also got hurt. I think people forget that. So the Eagles were down to Marvin Wilson. That's when they had to go out and get Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh, but it was more in relation to Jordan Davis. It was more Linval. And by that point, the Eagles were a significant Super Bowl contender. Linval knows how to play.
He does.
Understands the role. And they were like, you know what? Let's make a run to the Super Bowl. Let's go with the veteran guy. And, Jordan still played in a rotation, but that was their thought process. Not that he was a bad player. Let's just go with the veteran and try to get over the hump. It's interesting. He was the 13th pick in the draft, and he's a 2-down player. So, we talked about the Fangio scheme. Well, what you have is the variable front. So you got the 5-man front, the 4-man front. You need that zero technique, that nose tackle, and that's what Jordan Davis is. Here's the thing, and you can see that. Hassan Reddick, 235. Nolan Smith, 235. Nakobe Dean, they list him at 220. He ain't 220. Nicholas Morrow, 218.
Small dudes.
Small. It's basically, you know what, Jordan Davis, go tie up a bunch of blockers. So it's not a sexy role. And I think I said this at the time when they drafted him. I think it's a little bit too esoteric for people to understand. But if he does his role, it's not going to be a lot of sacks, not even going to be a lot of tackles. But if he keeps blockers off TJ Edwards at the time and Kaiser White, it's going to be worth it. Now it's Nakobe Dean and Nicholas Morrow or whomever. If he's able to keep blockers off those linebackers, he's worth it. If he can't, he's not.
John, here again, and it's a great explanation, and I try to explain that as well, that he affects play action if you stop the run. And the quarterbacks that they're going to play this year, John, you take play action away from Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, and you've made them one-dimensional. That's the impact he's going to have for Reddick, for Nolan Smith, for Josh Sweat, for Brandon Graham, and for the pass rushers. That's what I thought last year Sue and Linville brought, is that's what elevated the game of Reddick, was because they went from what was the number, 23 against the rush to about 15, 16 against the run. They improved it, and he exploded with that. If they're able to get that number higher, I'm not saying that I agree with you. John, they're not going to even approach 70. If they're in the 50s, that'll be a great year. If they're in the 50s.
I expect him to be in the 50s, but
what's that?
I expect him to be in the 50s, but
you're around 55. John, that's a really good ball season for your guys.
Oh yeah.
If you're 55,
guess what? There. Number 1 in the NFL last year was, I think 55 was number 2. I believe 55 was number 2. So yeah, I mean, look, the Eagles' whole defense, like most defenses, but the Fangio defense is built to get the 3rd and long and then pin the ears back. And that's where Khalil Mack, if you go back to Chicago, and Akeem Hicks and Robert Quinn, and those guys went nuts. Same thing here. Known pass, you got a lot of issues if Hassan Reddick and Josh Sweat and Brandon Graham are coming at you.
This has got to be one of my favorite interviews in 2 years I've been on this network. This is my favorite kind of interview. Back and forth, ping pong in that bitch, hitting a little couple arm wrestling match. I love it.
I'm not going to beat you in arm wrestling.
Hey, don't forget, folks, Birds 365 in the morning. Absolutely spectacular job. Those guys do a super job each and every single day. John's work, too, also on JAKIB Sports. Make sure you go check it out. I do every single day to learn more and more about your Birds and the NFL. John, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, brother.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
You got it. John McMullen, don't forget, check him out over on Birds 365 in the morning and also over at JAKIB Sports. Please hit the like button. Hour number 2. What do you think? We just sit around here ass kissing the people? What do you think Big Sills does here? How you doing? I agree to disagree. No, you're crazy. Boom. Hour number 2. Keep it here on the National Football Show.